So welcome to tonight's author chat with Susanna Kearsley. I am super excited to have her. Of course, many of you know we were the two of the authors in the anthology, The Deadly Hours. And I met Susanna, gosh, I don't know, a decade ago at a writer's conference. I think was the first time we met, and I have adored her writing for even longer than that. And so I was so stoked when I got to meet her. And then we've become kind of friends, and it's just been like, you know, I fangirled so much when I first met her. So it's like kind of a dream come true that we can call each other buddies. So anyway, if you all would like to ask any questions throughout the evening, just go ahead and pop them in the chat. And I'm going to be checking those throughout the evening. So I'm just making sure this is all good. And we are. All right. So if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat, or just things you want us to talk about. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of chat together and have a good time. So first, I wanted to ask you, Susanna, because I love finding this out about authors. I feel like we don't talk about it a lot, but kind of tell us a little bit about your early life and growing up. And, you know, I know your mother had an independent bookstore, and I mean, all the just all your kind of influences and where you come from.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, this could take the hour. I apologize to people. I know I'm supposed to look into the camera, so like I look like I'm looking at everybody, but I always look at Anna because, you know, then it feels like we're chatting. So if I don't know which direction she is on everybody's screen, but she's over here for me. So that's the way I'm looking. So there you go. So, well, let's see. I was born into a family of amateur genealogists, which I tell people a lot. So my dad is an engineer. My mom is a lab technologist, but she took time off when she had my sister and myself. So for the time that we were really little kids, she was sort of at home with us. She always kept up her certification as a lab technologist. So I always remember sitting on the couch with these like massive books of chemistry and stuff. And she would go in and take her like her tests and stuff to keep up her certification. But she was always home with us. And then she bought the little old house and in our town and ran it as an independent bookstore. The idea being that would be income as well. Didn't work out that way because my sister and I would get to the boxes of books first. And I have somewhere over here, I've got like an entire hardcover set of Anne of Green Gables books that came out of that store with my mom's handwriting in the front of all the prices and stuff. But my sister had one too that is down in South Carolina, you know, her house. But we would do things like that. We would just go, you know, and take all the books home, and my mom would have to then order another set for the store to sell. But half the store was new books and half the store was used books. And for the used books, our family would go out to auction sales every weekend and get these amazing boxes of books. And we'd pour through those. And my sister and I would take half of those out. So there's probably a bunch of those in there as well. And, you know, so it was just a great time. But our family moved around a lot as well because of my dad's job. So we were the longest we ever lived anywhere when I was growing up was 5 years. But more likely, we were just kind of in a place for a couple of years. We lived different places. We lived overseas. I lived in South Korea for a couple of years. Lived down in the States. I lived in Bay City, Texas. Went to Bay City, Texas just before Hurricane Alicia came through. So I didn't live in Bay City, Texas for that long because that was pretty much me done and dusted. It was like, yep, not my sort of place to live in. I was done with the hurricanes and the tornadoes. But you know, and my parents ended up coming back and settling down, and I just kept on moving. And I lived in Wales and lived various other places, and then got married to a man who has always lived in the town where we're living now. So I've been in this house for over 20 years, which is the longest place I've ever lived anyway. But that's probably why the one recurring theme in my books is belonging. Where do you belong? Because my characters, like me growing up, are always people coming into an area that is not their own area. And, you know, dealing with questions of family and belonging and what makes your home, where do you actually fit in? and not in a kind of melancholy way, but in a kind of interesting asking the question way. All my grandparents and cousins were from one particular town in Ontario, Canada, that my parents had both come out of. And so, my grandparents' houses became the kind of fixed point of my childhood, because although we moved all over the place, my grandparents were always in one place. And, so it's all that's sort of my weird little childhood. But I always wrote stories. I always told stories, made things up, made up some amazing, lies and stories about how things happened. If something happened to me, I would spin this little tale about it that my parents usually knew wasn't true, but they would be entertained by it most of the time. And I can remember sitting at the kitchen table when I was, like as young as 6 or 7, while my mom was making supper. I can remember actually writing down stories. I remember my mom letting me borrow remember those old, so maybe you don't, you're probably too young, the cassette tape players that had the little freestanding microphone type thing. So I remember taking that and actually talking into it and making tapes of my, my story. And then my mom bought me for Christmas one year, she bought me one of those very ornate journal books that, that looked like an old book, but it was all blank inside. And that was when I started making my notes for my book. And I would have been probably about, 8 or 9 at the time. So I was always telling a story and writing a story without really knowing, that was something you could make money at. And then I read Little Women when I was 7, and recognized myself in Jo. It was more recognizing myself and thinking, that's what I am. That's what I am. And after that, it was just, I still didn't think you could make money at it. I didn't think it was something I could make money at. So, I like I said, we were always moving around. When we came back from Korea, I was really interested in politics. I was really interested in Asia. I went into university for international development and politics as a double major. And then I ended up sidestepping kind of into museum work because I got a really cool summer job in a museum, and it turned into a permanent job and turned into training in museum work that turned into a job as a curator that turned, so my life has just been all these little stumbling into things that I didn't expect to happen.
Well, I know your museum, I knew about your having worked as a curator in that, and I can see so much of your museum training and just the way you look at things in your stories. I love it. It says a lot about you. So
thank you. Thanks. Well, museum work is all about curation, right? Like it's all about, there are two things. I mean, one is interpretation. How do you take another time or an object of any kind, or a life of any kind, and how do you act as the conduit between that and the, your public? And as a writer, your public is your reader, right? So how do you interpret that to your reader? What is the easiest way to make the reader understand what you were trying to share with them?
Right.
And then how do you do that ethically and responsibly? That's the curation part of it, right? So the curation is all about what do you put in the storeroom and what do you put on display. There's a lot of choice that goes into that. And there are a lot of very loaded choices that go into that.
Absolutely.
What are you choosing to show and what are you choosing to hide? And what story are you creating by doing that? And how close is that to the truth? And how much of yourself is shaping that? Whose story are you listening to? Whose story are you leaving out? That happens in museums a lot. I mean, museums have always been, an arm of the government or the the rich person who owned the Cabinet of Curiosities, and what story were they trying to tell? You know, it's kind of like you think about a curated Instagram page, right? What story is that person trying to tell about themselves? Well, a museum is very much the same thing. You know, what am I trying to tell you by what I have on my bookcases, right? And what I'm leaving off, you know. I'm not showing you my messy floor. What am I trying to tell you about myself by not doing that, right? So you know, there are all these little stories that we're leaving off or you know, putting forward.
Right.
So the same thing, you do the same thing as a writer.
Right.
Who are you choosing to believe? Who are you putting on the page? Who are you leaving off the page? And why are you doing that? And it becomes a, you know, a lesson that I carried through very much when I was doing my historical writing, as I'm sure you do, you know, you do yourself. Like, you know, we both deal with women,
Right.
but we're doing our historical writing, and there's a reason for that, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, and I see it so much in yours. I mean, like, for example, you know, your The Winter Sea, you know, which you know, is started with John Moray. That was the first book with him and everything, which your latest, which is so funny. I have Sophia's this is the version
you have the British one, the British one.
Yeah, the Sophia's Secret, which is The Winter Sea here in the US.
Yes.
So it's the same book. And then the latest, The Vanish Days, is like kind of a prequel to it. And so, you know, you've done so much research, because I can see your heart in the fact you want to represent the Murrays and the, you know, all the people around them that were, especially the ones that were real, authentically, you know, to do them justice. And it's impressive the amount of research and everything that goes into that for you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, they're I think when you get attached to someone like that, like I get very protective of them. I get very indignant on their behalf. You know, I'll start thinking like I have to. I protective is a good word. Like I'll be reading along and you know, they did all these amazing things, and they were just left off the page. They were just left off the page, and or they were misrepresented. It's worse when they're misrepresented. I get very indignant on behalf of poor King James VIII, you know, like, because people will represent him a certain way, and it's like, but he didn't say that. That's not what he said. That's not what he did. And then he tried to do this, and then he tried to do that, and he actually passed a bill for religious tolerance that would have let everybody worship as they wanted to. He was not the way you wanted, you to portray him, you know.
Exactly.
And you know,
totally
King James the seventh, sorry, not eighth, seventh. You know, like,
it totally changes the narrative when you know the truth versus what people shaped it to, wanted it to look like. Yeah.
Right. So that's curation again. It's kind of, you know, that's not even curation. That's just lying. That's just, you know, that's kind of, it's it. And all it takes is one person to lie, and then for that lie to be picked up by other people and amplified as a truth. And it's an easy thing to do when people play that game down through history, because people who are writing history books sometimes just go back to one person's account, and they'll say, okay, well, Daniel Defoe said this. Daniel Defoe was there on the spot. He was there at the time. He was a first person observer, so we can trust what he says. It's like, well, yeah, but Daniel Defoe was sent north by the British government as a spy with an agenda to make sure that the Union happened. So he was doing this. He was anti-Jacobite. He was this. He was that. You know, so you can't trust everything Daniel Defoe said. You know, you have to read opposing views, and you have to do this. So, you know, it's not as simple as just going back and taking one person's word for it who was there on the street at the time. That would be like today only getting one side of the news. You know, like you have to get a few people's opinions and then decide in the middle. I always tell the story of when I was at university. I took one of my favorite classes was political inquiry and analysis, which was my favorite because it was taught in the pub. There were only about 6 or 7 of us in the class, third year class. And the professor came in. We were doing the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the professor came in, and he brought a bunch of books on the Cuban Missile Crisis. And one was an American book on it. One was a Russian book on it, an English translation. One was Canadian. One was, I think, British. I think there was a French book. I can't remember any of the, but there were several books in a pile, and he just kind of put them all in the middle. at the table. He said, now read all those, and somewhere in the middle of those is what actually happened. And I've remembered that to this day, because it's so true. You have to get all angles and then decide from that,
Right,
who you trust, why you trust them, you know, where the accounts overlap, and what actually happened in the middle. And it's a trick. You know, it's you have to analyze what you're being told and not just accept it.
absolutely. Yeah, straight up. Um, I'm curious, just because I love the Winter Sea, I love the Firebird, and you know that whole all the interconnected.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for the Vanish Days? Have you wanted to write this prequel? Has it been something that's been in your mind?
I wanted to write it. You know what I wanted to write? Do you remember the old stories like The Winds of War, and those big sweeping stories where you'd have these big giant, you know, almost like, you know, like a mini, well, they became mini series usually back in the day, but they were like big doorstop books, and they were, you know, so you'd have all these different people, but you'd have one group of people in like one location and one group in another, and all these different, you know, stories happening. So when I found out about the Darien Expedition, I loved the whole concept of the Darien Expedition, which was Scotland's attempt to build a colony in what is now Panama. And I'd never heard about this before. And the more I heard about it, it seemed like this big romantic thing. And I thought, you could make this amazing story that was like a Winds of War type story, with like, you know, part of it happening in Panama, part of it happening in New York, part of it in London, part of it in Spain, because there were some people that were taken as prisoners to Spain. And at the time, I thought one of those people who was taken a prisoner in Spain was Jamie Graham, because that was in the Book of the Grahams. They write that is Colonel Graham's son. But of course, I found out in my research, not so, right? It's the wrong Jamie Graham. But at the time I was thinking, wouldn't that be awesome? I could write, you know, I could have all these different stories going. So I sat down to research that. This is the book I had in my head. Big, giant doorstop book. Boopity, boopity, boop. This is going to be like my, you know, I'm old enough now to tackle something like this. I can take it on. And as I start doing this research with, you know, because I love the Grahams, I love the Murrays, I can see how everybody can kind of fit into this. As I start doing the research, the voice that starts talking to me is none of those voices. The voice that starts talking to me is Adam's voice. And the first sentence I get is, I was a younger man when I first met her. And I thought, so who are you? And what is this? What is, you know, because I don't write first person male. You know, I'm not going to do that, but it's not, no, you know, that's not a book I want to do. So I kind of pushed that to the side, and I went on with my research for this great big grand adventure giant, you know, Darien, you know, doorstopper book. And this voice was just so insistent. He just kept talking and talking and talking. So I said, okay, fine, I will write the opening and we'll see. And once I wrote the opening, which is exactly the opening as it was there, I thought, okay, I've got to write this now, because I really love this guy. I want to see where he's going. I want to see what happens. I you know, we'll just see where it goes. And I just let it go, which is what I do with all my books. I just let them go. I had all this timeline of research, because whenever I'm doing research, reading letters, reading history books, reading journals and articles and stuff like that, what I do is I make note of dates that things happen in real life. I make note of characters. I make note of what the weather was like, or you know, who was where. And I sort of keep that all in one, what I call my timeline, which is a document that has nothing else in it other than just a string of dates going all the way down, and then what was going on, you know. King James went to France. King James came back from France. King James, you know, it was snowing. It was this. It was that they mustered the people on the hill. So if my characters by chance decide to do something interesting on, you know, October 11th, 1683, then I know that, you know, they're there. One of the things I had found in that timeline was, you know, because Colonel Graham, of course, came into that timeline. So one of the things I had found in that timeline was Edward Aitchison, Colonel Graham's one of
yes.
Colonel Graham's guardsmen.
Right.
I had found an incident dealing with Colonel Graham's guardsman, Edward Aitchison, and that stuck. That just stuck with me for some reason. I felt very sorry for Edward Aitchison.
Is it the event that happens in the book?
Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah.
That's true. And I didn't know his first name back then. I just knew it was Aitchison. He was just recorded as Aitchison. And then with the help of Alison Lindsay, who is the head of the historical search rooms at National Archives of Scotland, or the National, see, my brain is just
You're all good.
Where I go in Scotland to sit in the reading room. National Records of Scotland is what it's actually called. She is just amazing. She helps me, find all these things. So she brought out her big books, and we looked for everything to do with Aitchison, and together we ended up finding that it was Edward Aitchison, and we confirmed the dates and everything, and we just kept finding all these little bits and pieces on Edward, and then I did genealogical work on Edward Aitchison, and I was able to find his wife, and I was able to find his children, and then that really hit me in the heart, because then I was able to see his baby son and how young his baby son was at the time. So then I thought, okay, well, I have to include you. And then I just gave him an extra daughter. I gave him Lily, who is the heroine. And then once I have Lily and I have my hero who's narrating, then I have my story.
Right.
And my Winds of War book just panicked. So I'm kind of like, okay, all right, I'm writing this now. I'm writing this other book now, and the Winds of War book is just done. And someone else will have to write it, or maybe when I'm like 80, well, you know how I am. I have these ideas, and then you waited 3 years for my novella. So, maybe the Winds of War book will come like 10 years from now, because I still have not, not giving anything away, but I still haven't actually made it to Darien. So although I actually physically, as part of the research for this book, I went to Panama.
Oh, wow.
And Cartagena, and because you never know whether the characters are going to need to go there. So that was cool. Awesome. That was fun.
I have to say too, with this book, it's written in a different format than a lot of your previous books. And so, and the first thing that I thought of, just because of knowing you, I was like, oh my goodness, she's writing first person mail, like you said.
I know, it's just like
that, so I mean, this must have been a bit of an extra challenge, just because it was something new that you've not done before. I thought it worked brilliantly, but I just mean it probably was
scary. Scary.
Yeah.
But you know what, when I think back on it, I think the novella From Deadly Hours was actually almost my brain training me for that, right? Because the novella is from his point of view.
Right.
So it's a male voice, it's just third person.
Right.
And then even before that, in Bellwether, I have a section that is a male third person point of view.
Yeah.
So it's almost like my brain was going, okay, training wheels, here we go. Like, we're gonna just ease you into this, because you might want to do. And the book I'm writing now, the first line I got for it was, "Be grateful you were born a man." I'm like, oh crap. Not again. And it was "Be grateful you were born a man," my younger sister said to me. I'm like, oh no. But luckily, then I also got a modern day female narrator voice to go along with that.
Oh, cool.
The only problem is now I've got 2 first person voices. One in the past who's male, one in the present who's female. And I'm like, oh, which is because normally when I'm doing a dual time, I have one in, like, the one in the past is third person and the one in the present is first person, so that the reader, when they're opening up a book, and they know right away where they are. If they're third person, they're in the past. If they're first person, they're in the present. So what I'm going to try, and you can, I'll have to bounce it off you as I'm writing to see if it works. What I'm going to try is I'm going to try to do my guy in the past in male first person present.
Oh, wow.
I know. I know. But when I thought about it, the ending of the Vanish Days is male first person present.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
So I think, again, training wheels,
Right.
you know,
That's funny. It is funny.
so,
Your brain is it knows before you know.
Yeah.
Because
I was sitting there thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to work this out? You know.
That's funny. I know when I read books in present, I'm always like I can read them fine once I shift gears, but if I'm doing a lot of writing, it totally throws me off. You know what I mean? Just because I'm not, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, it's one of those things. But
I asked a friend of mine, Liza Palmer, who's a really, really good writer. And she writes a lot in first person present. And I said, do you think it'd work? And she's like, oh yeah, I love first person present. And I said, what do you love about it? And she said, because it's, it's really active and you don't know if the person's going to live, And I was like,
true. Very
interesting.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
it's immediate.
Yeah.
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 I wanted to ask you because it's a secondary character and I just happen to love him. Is Robert Murray Robin a real person?
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Like,
yeah, Robin was supposed to have a little cameo because Robin was actually truly in prison in Edinburgh Castle at the time that my story takes place. And I thought, how cool is that? How convenient. Thank you,
right.
Robin. I will use you in the story. And people will like to see Robin because he's John's brother. He's John's big brother. He fits perfectly into the plot. And, it gives me a chance to use some of the research that I've done because I've actually, read a lot of his letters and I can I can use his dialogue and he writes, when he writes, he gives a lot of his conversation as well. So, you can actually lift parts of his conversations with people and dump them in, which is always really useful when you're writing. It's like, give his words back to him. So he was just supposed to be the person they went to see that had this little cameo, but Robin, being a Murray, is kind of like, yeah, no, we're gonna do he got this expanded role, and yeah, I loved him because
I do too.
And in the real papers that I'm reading about Robin, it's really fun because a lot of the stuff written is by people that were, let's say it's somebody going up to serve Robin with or to give Robin his warrant from when he was in prison, because they never actually properly gave him his warrant when he was in prison. So now they're going up to deliver the warrant, but he won't accept it now because, he's out of prison. He's fine. He doesn't need the warrant anymore. And legally, he doesn't want to accept it because he still wants to hold them responsible for, improperly imprisoning him. So he's a lawyer. He's very, very crafty, very sneaky. And this poor guy has gone all the way up from Edinburgh to deliver this warrant to him. And now Robin's giving him this, very legalese runaround. And you can feel the frustration dripping off the guy who is writing back to his overlord to tell him why, Robin wouldn't accept the warrant. And he's relaying the entire conversation he had. And then I said this, and then he said that, and then I said this, and then he said this. And it just gives me such a picture of what Robin would have been like, this tangling people up in their words. And then when I finally, when the Abercairny Murrays actually reached out and got in touch with me and made friends with me and took me around and showed me the portraits of everybody. And you look at Robin's portrait, you're like, oh yeah, he's just like, he's mischief on a stick, man. He's just got that look in his eye that is just, he would just be one of those people that A, would really like to sit down and have a cup of coffee with, but B, would so not want to be across the courtroom from because he is so smart. So I really loved reading him.
I just loved him. He was like, every time I gravitated. I was like, oh yes, like more,
I like him a lot.
Wanting to come back. So
yeah, me too.
Like, you need to write him more. You need to.
Well, you never know. See, all the brothers were good. They're all, and that's why it's so amazing to me that, and like when in real life, all the brothers like John, William, Robin, John, and Morris were, we're all fascinating men. And the fact that they've all been just, overlooked in the history
lost to us.
Lost.
Yeah.
And that's just the Murrays. And that's just the men. That's not touching on what the women were like. And then you've got the Grahams, who were, equally amazing. So, I've still got Grahams I haven't done yet, but I'm not done with that family by a long shot. So that's my thing now, is it's just kind of like, I keep finding family members. It's like, ooh, now I can do it. The one I'm writing now is going back into the earlier Murrays and Grahams. So, and then I'm going to
very cool
come forward. Yeah. So,
well, we all want more. So
me too. I'm not ready to be done with it. So.
And I have to say, I don't want to give anything away, but you had one of the best twists in this book.
Thank you.
Okay, it takes a lot to fool me. Like I because I read
and
so
you know
much
me too, so
and you fooled me. So yeah, you got me, and I was just like, it was one of those jaw drop. Oh my gosh, how did I? You know what I mean? So everybody needs to read this, because you will do, when you get to the twist, you're gonna just like, what? So now I want to read it again. So
well, it'd be fun. It'd be interesting to see when you read it again, if you pick everything up, because I tried really hard to be really fair. Right. And this is see, I'm a last page of the book reader, and this is not a book you can read the last page of. This is one that,
you've got to be along for the ride, because I'm the same way. I'll skip ahead, and I didn't.
Yeah.
And but like I could think back and be like, oh, like I should have caught it. And then it was good. It was good. So
I tried really hard.
Well, let me check and see if we've got, and y'all, everybody that's watching, if you have any questions or any just things you want us to talk about, pop them in. I have a few more. If not, let's see. What was the most, somebody wants to ask about the anthology. What was the most fun part of writing The Deadly Hours, and what was the toughest part? I guess why don't you go ahead and go, and then
no, you go. What was the
for me, the most fun part was just getting to work with you guys. Because as an author, you're so in your own world, by yourself writing these things. So getting to collaborate with other authors was just fun, and bounce ideas off each other, and somebody would come up with something better than I could think of, and vice versa. And it was just fun. And then the toughest part was probably just writing. I had written one novella before. I think it was the only one, right, that had written one. But even though I'd written one, it was just tricky to get a story down to the number of words, like I always would throw in subplots. So I had to be a lot sparer than normal, I guess.
It's so funny, because you were trying to get down to the number, and I was trying to get I was trying to make sure that I took the longest of everybody, right? Because everybody else peeled it off so fast. And I took I literally, when I say 3 years, I'm not joking. I was it was a long time before I added mine to the plot.
There was a lot going on those years too.
It was a bit, but the best part was it was having a group to shape the whole thing. So you're creating one piece of a 4-piece puzzle and making it all work at the end. It's not like you're just doing one thing and throwing it in. It was everything had to, because what Candy did at the end with hers dovetailed into mine, and then you're taking something and then passing it off, but passing it off in a way that someone else can pick it up neatly and take it, right? And that was really cool. That was a really fun challenge. And the challenging part was getting it done. Because and again, I think every time you face a new style of writing, it's the fear of, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I have this tool in my toolbox. I don't think I can succeed at this. I've never done it. And three of us had never written novellas before. And so I don't think we did a bad job for our first novellas, really. I think we did okay,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% with you, though, about the, I've learned that if it's not a challenge, then I'm not trying hard enough.
No, I know. I always try to scare myself with every book. right?
Yes.
Like
it's always
that,
that have I bitten off too much, you know?
yeah, that panic feel, it's a good panic. It's not a,
Yes.
it's not a paralyzing panic. It's just this kind of like, oh my gosh, you know, like what am I stepping into? What am I doing? You know, I think if you go into your writing room and you don't feel like people in white coats are going to come and point at you and go, you out of the pool, you know, then you're not doing it right. You know, it's I just feel like every day that I don't have the training to do what I'm doing. You know, it's kind of like when you become a mom for the first time too. Like you just feel like someone's going to come and take your child away because you obviously have no clue what you're doing. And that's a lot what I feel like with writing every day. I feel like, and people are always coming to you for advice, and it's like, you know, you learn some things. You do learn. You know, there are some tricks and some techniques that you do actually learn and perfect as you get, you know, through the different books. Because I think I'm on my 15th now, starting my 5th. If you count the novella, this is the 15th that I'm starting now. So there are some things that are always the same. You know, you always feel like it's trash in the middle. Always feel like it's trash in the middle. But you know, but then there are all these things that are different that you didn't see coming, right?
Yeah, which is the magic of it. And
so it keeps it fun. Yeah,
you know. That's why I never plot too closely, because it's so much better in the midst of writing it, because the characters say things that oh my gosh, I wouldn't have thought 2 months ago when I was plotting this, you know. So yeah,
you have to leave room for the magic.
Yes,
you have to leave room for the magic.
Absolutely. We have someone who's saying, yeah, I love this too. When you find out how to pronounce something, you're like, Murray. I didn't know that.
Murray.
Murray.
You know, well, it's a thing. It's and it, you know, the one thing is you should never, ever, I remember that it's a good saying that you should never make fun of anybody that mispronounces something that they, you know, because it usually means they learned it in a book.
Right.
They learned it from reading it. Right.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like there's so many words that I didn't know how to say and will still mispronounce because I learned them from reading them. Right. And, you know, so it looks like moray, right? And so it looks like it should be moray. And unless you're, you know, the last name that looks like Urquhart is actually pronounced Beckett, you know, it gets just like, you know, it's all these things that you just, it's Murray.
Absolutely.
Unless you're in certain parts of Edinburgh, and then it's like, you know, not. So it's, you know, it's just, it's like Warwick, right? Warwick, but it looks like Warwick.
There's a lot. Honestly, there's a lot. For me, what I get stumbled across, especially with English words or places, is that it's where the accent goes. It's not that I'm necessarily saying it differently. I'm just doing the accent in a different place, so it sounds, you know what I mean, kind of thing. Yeah. Well,
see, Canadians learn it early because we get hit with stuff like Worcestershire sauce and stuff like that. So we learn really early that, you know, what's on the bottle is not the way you pronounce it. It's kind of like,
or there's like, you know, silent letter like Anik. You know, it's not Alnwick.
Yeah.
You know, or all those different things. With the Verity Kent series, I find myself, because I'm all these World War I battles, and like the battlefield names are not what it looks like.
Well, the big one I think is Chumley. Chumley, that looks like Cholmondeley, which is not Chumley.
Or, you know. Well, even Passchendaele, you know, it looks like Passchendaele, you know, like
Passchendaele.
There you go, Passchendaele. That's what I mean. I say it wrong.
Well, see, no, but that's because you read it. You read it in the book.
I know how to spell it, and it's a weird spelling,
which is more than a lot of people. Passchendaele. So, you know.
Let's see. Any other questions? Lots of people super excited about the talk and the books and all that. So, somebody said, is hearing Susanna talk about writing from the male point of view giving Anna ideas? I've been promising for a long time that maybe I'll write some scenes some
From the male point of view.
earlier books in Gage's point of view or Sydney's point of view, so we can find out.
Are you going to? You thinking of it?
If I ever have time, I would love it. Just there's like certain scenes, and I know which ones they're talking about. But they want to know,
what they're thinking.
Yeah. You're so good at planning clues. Someone says, let's see, you have time travel novels. Would you want to do it in real life? And if so, what time would you go to?
What time would I go to? Well, I think I would actually really, really like to, I'd like to go to Abergavenny at the time that my people lived there. That
would be cool.
The problem is they're not there. They're I'd have to pick them together all over the place. So I would like to go see. John was already away from Abergavenny in the late 1700s. He had already gone to Saint-Germain, so maybe I'd like to go to Saint-Germain and walk around and see. That would be a good place to go. I'd like to time travel to Saint-Germain and see the court, because John was there and Robin came over and everybody, and Colonel Graham was there. That would be cool. I'd like to go see it at the early moment when everybody was kind of wandering about, and I'd like to just be in the courtyard when John Murray walked past. And just be a fly on the wall and see young King James and his mother. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful palace. It's a stunning palace, and it would have really been something back in the day when when all the outbuildings were still there and all the gardens were still there. And it's just a lovely, lovely place. It's got a lovely feel to it. But when you're in the inner courtyard in the chapel, where the chapel and everything is, it's just gorgeous. So I would like to be there.
That's a cool one. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to think, and that's a really good one, and nice and specific too.
Yeah. Just to see, because I've seen the portraits, but portraits don't give you the living person. Portraits give you always the style of the painting of the day, and they're wearing their wigs. And the wigs are never, the wigs of the style of the day were always the higher ones, right? So the higher curly long ones of when they were, the men were young, not necessarily what they would have worn as they got a little bit older. But it's enough, you can see their eyes, you can see their faces, you can see their expressions, but you can't see how tall they were. I mean, the family papers give you descriptions and talk about them being tall and talk about them being this, but it's not the same as seeing a person in action, seeing a person striding across the corridor, seeing a person in uniform, or seeing a person, in conversation. And I would just, I'd like to have a chat with Robin. I'd like to watch John walk and just, just see what they were like. And so as I can portray them more accurately, it's just, and I'd like to, tell John not to go into that final battle. Maybe he didn't, who knows? Maybe, maybe what I'm writing is not necessarily so wrong after all. So, because one of the things I did find out was, again, not to give any spoilers of anything, but one of the things I did find out, because at the time when you write things, you don't necessarily have all the information. And then you find family documents later that are kind of giving you more information than you had before. But I injure him in a certain way. And I found out that he actually was injured in that certain way. So there are all these, it's kind of like, maybe I'm not, it is. Yeah. And his eyes were the color that I made them in the book. So yeah.
That's awesome.
It is cool. Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah. I know it's one of those things where it's as a historical writer, you're worried later on you're gonna be oh my gosh, when you can't find a specific fact and you just have to guess, an educated guess, and then you worry later on you're gonna find out, oh no, I did it wrong, So to find out that you got it right, you're just like,
got most of it right. I got the battle that I had him fall at was not the battle that
gotcha.
that he fell at,
Right.
But it's close.
Right. Right.
So,
It just mean, you didn't like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Wasn't too far off.
Well, if anybody has any other questions, you can pop them in. I've got one more. That I've loved Lily too. We haven't talked about Lily much in this, the heroine of this book. And I thought one of the things that I loved was that in this book, we really got to focus on, she's a lower class than like the Murrays and the Grahams technically. And we got to really see how that interplays also with this whole history and everything that's the Jacobites and everything that's going on and those families. And I loved it. I thought it added this extra dimension, and Adam even, and all that. And just the level of detail, of their daily lives was just so impressive. I loved it. Yeah. I mean, and I know you've been to Edinburgh, you have the map, and I mean, all the details. And
I stayed in the house that I was writing about. So like, it's a National Trust property. And
I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, because I've been there and I was like, wow, I feel like this is the house she's writing about. That's cool. Okay.
It is.
Cool.
So it's got these little flats. So I was there like a few years. I didn't stay there a few years consecutively.
Right.
I went for like 3 years in a row and stayed in the same flat for 3 years in a row.
Cool.
Which was cool. I was writing different books while I was there, but I was researching. And one of the cool things is that in that house, there's a room that's done up, not in the period that I'm writing about, but it's done up in a little later period. And one of the paintings hanging on the wall, as I came down, I thought, that's a familiar looking face, and it's Captain Thomas Gordon. And I thought, okay, so that's a sign that I'm writing. It's the
I
right
loved
place.
him too. That's another character that I
adore. But Lily being lower class is something that, I have people in my own family that, were in service, and
right.
Again, these are people that get left out of the
right.
The historical record, and people don't write about them very much. And yet tons and tons and tons of people were on that level.
Most of us were not.
Most of us were not, in the big house. And these are the lives that get affected by the bigger people making their decisions. And still today, the people that get affected by the bigger people making the decisions are the people that are further down the chain. And I wanted to kind of explore that, like what happens when the bigger people make the calls to do this or to do that. How does it affect everybody else? And how do you just live your life when all this turmoil is going on? And when you're not necessarily cast one way or the other, because it's not everybody is firmly, political one way or the other. Some people are just trying to make a life.
Right.
And, I wanted to sort of look at those people and how they made it through. Because you can be, there are good people on both sides of the equation. I mean, there are, it was a difficult time. It was a tricky time.
Right.
I'm definitely a pro-Jacobite in the way that I write my things, but Turnbull himself, Adam's former commander, Turnbull was an honorable man who lived an honorable life, and you don't want to portray him as a nasty person. He didn't do anything in his life that I know of that was nasty, so I wanted to portray him and his wife in a good way. But you have to show society as it existed, right? There were all these different factions, and they were just, it was so fragmented. It still is. Right. And to understand Scotland now and why it is having, the issues it's having, you have to understand Scotland then and how that union happened. And you have to also understand Scotland like 100 years back from that and 200 years back from that. And it's not something that's just random or just, it's everything. You have to always look to the past to understand the present. You have to.
And it cycles. I mean, so much you can read a book and pull so much from that and apply it to
Same people.
contemporary. Yeah.
It's like
We're all
Agatha
people.
Christie sitting in her little, village. It's the same people. You have the same people, profiting by conflict and profiting by setting the world on fire, and the same people just trying to get by, and the same people, it's always that you can recognize the same types of
Yes.
people throughout history.
Right.
And you could overlay them on today's politics in pretty much any country.
Right. Right.
It's not even tied to a country. It's like, pretty much any place, right? So that's one of the lessons of history, is that this is just human. This is what happens. And in order to understand and navigate it ourselves, you have to understand the pattern. You have to understand what we're coming from, and how we navigated it before, and how we survived it before.
Yeah. And the mistakes, what if we'd done this instead of this? Okay.
Yeah.
So we're in this situation now. So, yeah.
Maybe zig instead of zag, and you get a different action. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, well, thank you so much for joining me. This was fun. I always love catching up with you. And
I love it too.
Readers can listen into. So, yeah, and I don't have any other questions. So yeah, I guess we will call it a night. And so thank you everybody for joining us. And you've got to check out the Vanish Days by Susanna. And if you have not read anything by Susanna before, I recommend The Winter Sea. I think it's one of everybody's favorites to start with. Or The Vanish Days, because it's the prequel. So you could just go there.
Yeah, either or. But you're right. The Winter Sea is a good one to start with. The Winter Sea is a good. It's what a lot of people call that the gateway drug. It's the gateway drug book, right?
Yes.
It's
my personal favorite. I'm not exactly sure why, but I just love it. As all the shadowy horses is my favorite. It's still my favorite. So I love all your books, but
you like Scotland. You like Scotland.
Yeah,
you like your windswept moors and your
and the archaeology and all that stuff is just, it hit me in the sweet spot. So
and you're working on tell everybody what you're working on.
Oh yes.
Yep.
So Verity Kemp book 5 just came out 2 months ago, month and a half ago, whatever. Murder Most Fair, and I am currently working on book 6. Oh my goodness, what's it called? A Certain Darkness, which is out next year. So, and the next release is actually the Lady Darby, A Peerless Perspective, which will be out April. Actually, I should announce this. They've bumped the release date just by 3 weeks for different reasons. So it's still out in April, but it's April 26th now. So just a little bit later. And Susanna, what are you writing right now? What are you working on next?
I'm working on a book called The Lesser Stars. It's still Murray's and Graham's, but like I said, I'm going back to 1613.
So the prequel.
It's a prequel. It's dealing with Sir David Murray, who was an Abergavenny Murray, who was the right-hand man of Prince Henry, King Charles I's older brother.
Okay.
Prince Henry died mysteriously in 1612 as a young man, and so it kind of deals with the aftermath of that. But my hero, Andrew Logan, is actually an ancestor of Robbie, your favorite.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. And so he's an ancestor of Robbie, and I didn't have any paranormal at all in the Vanish Days, and I kind of missed having a little bit of. I like to play with a bit with the unexplained. So in this one, I'm going to be dealing with premonition and the sight, and so it fits for a ancestor of Robbie.
Right.
So and there's a modern day component which is going to be interesting to be writing in a pandemic. So we'll see how that works. And so I'm keeping my fingers firmly crossed that everybody, keeps their masks on and keeps getting vaccinated, and I can get to Britain in the spring to do my research that I need to do. So
Yeah, me too. I'm hoping to get back next year because we were supposed to go last year. Well, that didn't happen. So
Yeah, sorry.
I really need to get there to get some research done. So
Yeah.
anyway, there's lots of little comments of just people that love stuff. So you can
Oh, well, that's
those
awesome.
later.
Well, thank you so much to everybody for coming out, and everybody stay safe and well and healthy. And
Yes.
and thank you, Anna, for having me.
Yeah,
It's so good to see you. So
You
good to
too.
see you. We email all the time, but it's just not the same as like seeing
It's not
someone.
to see somebody's face. That's like
Yeah.
I want to grab out and hug you.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway.
I know. That's what I miss most of all, is the hugging.
Me too.
Yep.
Hopefully next year. I'm like,
Yep.
So anyway, well, thank you everybody for joining me, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful night.